It's January 15th, 2022, and weekend is here, and a bit of relief, I think. They had me a little tense there with this whole voting bill thing and what was going to really happen on the filibuster. I was pretty sure that Manchin and Sinema were going to stand their ground, but I kept going, well, maybe they won't this time. And of course, the whole thing was that obviously what was going on with Schumer and the Democrat leadership was attempt to seriously roll them with emotional wave or something. In other words, the idea is that they were trying to get the bill into debate by some subterfuge, so they didn't have to go through the normal cloture process to begin debate. And then what they would do at that point is that they would then make a big push, emotional push, and try to pressure them into actually voting to end the filibuster to pass it. But they preemptively announced they weren't going to end the filibuster just before Joe Manchin shows up at the big meeting of Democrats in the Senate, and the whole thing kind of collapses. And I think also one of their members was not available because of a coronavirus quarantine. And so, at any rate, for the moment, that whole thing kind of collapsed and ruined, and we can hope it stays collapsed. I'm sure we're further toward seeing the daylight, but I'm not sure we're completely out of the tunnel yet, so to speak. I mean, because I've thought of a few other subterfuges, but I'm not even going to say that might be tried. But for the moment, I think we're in good shape on that. And like I said, I think that they're so committed to maintain the filibuster that I doubt they're going to change, for the reasons I've explained in previous videos, which is that they both have to do with their own personal philosophies and their own personal state-specific political strategies. So, anyway, if you like these videos, please subscribe. You can pass links around to people, to introduce them to it. Give me a like, which helps out with the algorithm, and any comments are welcome. Okay, so going on with this a little bit. So I think we've got past that for the moment at least, and I don't know. I think he's going back to now trying to brag about the infrastructure bill that was passed. So, but I wouldn't be surprised that some kind of social spending bill doesn't, in a more reduced and moderated form, doesn't eventually resurface here. The question is only how long, huh? And I think also I would give a little bit of a nod to Senator McConnell for great strategy here. I think his whole thing about bringing up the issue of reforming that voting bill that caused a big ruckus on January the 6th about which states' ballots would be counted and what role Congress had in it. Well, at any rate, I think that's been proposed that be modified so that the ambiguity be limited, so it isn't that the vice president has a particular unique role in it in which he could decide to do what he wants to do or something. And they could, So, and that was always a really a strange idea, and it caused a lot of damage and probably wrecked Mike Pence's career, which it shouldn't have, because it was never a real issue and it would never really have stood. But whatever. But that was offered by McConnell, which was rejected by Schumer because he wanted his big power grab thing. But it turns out that Joe Manchin had been pressing for just that reform instead of what Schumer wanted. It also turns out the bill they were trying to pass wasn't the one that Manchin had negotiated with I guess Stacey Abrams of everybody. It wasn't that bill at all. It was something. It was more of a House type bill, which had a lot more negative elements in it. But I don't think it matters anyhow. I think that there's a clear opinion that if you end the filibuster when the Republicans take the Senate next time, they would not have that protection against whatever interesting ideas we might come up with. And I think in a general, stability is probably better than going for a short-term gain only to have it swept away in the next election. And there is a case for stability. So, anyway, enough of that. I just wanted to kind of do a wrap up because we were kind of left hanging in the last video what was going to happen. Now, on the other hand, another issue, of course, is the Omicron COVID surge. And we're now getting real data on what the impact of that is. And while the death rates are slowly climbing in the current period, the actual case rate is at an all-time high, the average being over 800,000 cases a day. So that's much higher than it was on any of the other two previous surges. The original surge from back in last year ago, or the Delta surge in the summer. And I've been looking at the charts. If you look at the actual charts, you'll see that while we're at an all-time high on cases, that we're way lower on deaths. And even now, I think a lot of the people that are currently in the hospital and the ones that are actually dying in the hospital now of COVID are probably still, a lot of them I think, are probably still Delta cases that are left over from, say, the Thanksgiving time period, a little after, before the Omicron took over. And Omicron now is almost the only significant case out there. The Delta cases have been reduced to almost nothing. So I would tend to think at some point the death rates may even start declining, even before the cases start declining, as unfortunately the treatment plan ends for some of the people that are doomed, so to speak, of the Delta infections from that month ago. I mean, certainly some people linger in the hospital for 6 weeks or more with it. So under treatment. So, like I said, I think that this is milder, but on the other hand, I would also point out it is a serious illness yet. It's still probably at least as serious as a strong seasonal flu, or maybe a little worse. Of course, the problem with this disease is, and I have to keep repeating this, but its impact is quite variable compared to influenza. Tends to be more of a concentrated spike in what it does, in terms of its actual symptoms and effects. Whereas this thing seems to be much more variable, meaning on the one end, for some people, it's almost nothing, like a cold. And on other people, it's a very, very serious illness that puts them in a hospital or worse. So, and that's what's kind of interesting about it, is it's more random set of effects on people. So at any rate, we're hitting an all-time high. I see a little early signs that the chart seems to be bending over in terms of the 7-day average. We haven't probably hit the peak yet, but it looks like maybe the upward momentum is starting to slow a little bit. And so eventually here in a few weeks, it'll probably be heading back down in frequency, and probably by spring, it'll be in the background probably more. And then we'll be seeing whether we have another variant come out, or whether hopefully this thing will finally die down to just a normal background issue. Getting rid of it completely is probably it's probably joined the set of viruses that we have to deal with in the long run, but maybe we'll get to the point where it's mild enough that nobody will be thinking about making vaccines for it or something. I mean, for instance, we're not really trying to do vaccines for the common cold, as they call it, because again, I think there's a set of different viruses that actually create those infections. And so anyhow, at any rate, it was always considered too mutation prone to actually be a practical agenda item. This one probably wouldn't even been attempted to the degree it's been, other than the early variants being so fatal to elderly people and people with various immune deficiencies. Well, anyway, that's my thoughts on that. And then finally, I'll wrap this up with a few comments about Russia and NATO and all that. It looks like the negotiations are going nowhere, and I think a lot of it is because, again, I tend to blame our side a little bit on this and not showing enough respect for the Russians. I mean, after all, the issues like Ukraine and and Georgia and so forth are actually in Russia's backyard, just like places like Haiti and Panama have been in our backyard, and we've sent troops into there, and nobody actually acted like this was a major crime against humanity, I don't think. And the fact of the matter is, there are actual Russians in those countries, Russian ethnics, left over from the Soviet Union days, when it was one country, like people from different states moving into different states of the United States. And when a country that was made up of 15 different subdivisions, which they called republics, I guess, broke up, you were left with a lot of people kind of stranded in their own areas. And of course, in the case of Ukraine, let's face it, there's a lot of bad blood between Russians and Ukrainians over the years. Under the Stalinist period, there was a out-and-out effort to starve Ukrainians to death. And during World War II, Ukrainians, some of them served fighting with the Germans against the Soviet army because they wanted to be freed from Stalin. So in other words, there's a real issue on both sides, and it seems to me that rather than trying to play this game of, we're better than everybody and we're good international government people, why not actually hammer out some kind of a compromise which will protect the rights of the Russian ethnics that live in Ukraine, stop any kind of actual invasion or open conflict between the two countries, and not get us in a potential war. I mean, I don't think that the Russian demands are that unreasonable, really. I mean, Russia's now playing the gambit of, well, what if we put missiles back in Cuba or Venezuela? Well, we have weapons right up near their border, and the fact of the matter is that it does pose a theoretical threat. Let's say, I don't know if it poses a literal threat, and I don't think we actually would have the whatever to actually attack, but that's not the way the Russian thinks. The Russian is a bit paranoid, always has been, probably always will be, and therefore you're playing with their own mentalities here, and you're liable to set off kind of an irrational chain reaction of behaviors which could cause a lot of damage to the world. I mean, we are dealing with a nuclear power that has just about as much firepower in that area as we do, and maybe a little bit more actually, because we've been disarming so much. And so we don't want that conflict to really occur. At the same time, we don't want to seem to be weak. And the problem I have with this whole idea of putting people in NATO, it's not like they're joining a social club. When you let a country in NATO, you're making a commitment to go to war, okay, if that country's attacked. And people seem to think, well, gee whiz, let's put Lithuania or Latvia or Estonia into NATO. That's what we'll do. If they're attacked, we're going to go to war with Russia. And I'm like, do you really want to go to war with Russia over that? Seriously? I mean, what vital interest is there in that? And also, let's look at it practically. Exactly how would we fight this war? I mean, we don't have many troops there. I think we have a token force, but nothing that couldn't be brushed away rather quickly. And that's the point. Now, I don't want Russia to invade those countries either. And I think that we need to pursue the idea of neutrality in some of those bordering areas that used to be under Russian domination, not the idea of trying to bring them into NATO and then basically annoy the Russians to the point that something bad could happen. That's kind of my viewpoint. On the other hand, since we have brought countries into NATO, like Poland, why don't we have more forces there so that we could actually defend them if it really came down to it? I mean, after all, I'm looking at it both ways. On the one hand, if we're in NATO, we should be serious about how we would fight the war if we have to. If we're not prepared to fight the war, then don't bring them in NATO. That way you undermine the credibility of the alliance at the same time. What if they did invade one of those countries and we did nothing? That would mean the whole dang alliance would be like a paper shell after that. And that seems to me like we have amateurs running these diplomacy efforts nowadays, not people that have a real wit about the seriousness of the issues they're dealing with. In the Cold War, I think people did understand the seriousness of what they're dealing with. Well, guess what? Those missiles and bombs have been reduced in number, but they're not gone, and they're still on alert as I speak right now on both sides. And that's why this thing needs to be taken seriously, not treated like it's a minor issue or something. Finally, I don't think Russia wants to occupy all of Ukraine. I don't think that's their objective. I think they'd be putting themselves in a really endless guerrilla war if they did that. I don't think they want to do that. So I think we ought to work out a deal here, not sit around posturing all the time. And that's my 2 bits worth on it. Well, at any rate, I'll close this for now. My addresses of my social media accounts are in the descriptions below, and we will wrap this up for now until next time.